Laura, it's great to have you here. Welcome to Making Hope, Climate Action for Dark Times. This video is just going to be an introduction to the class, an introduction to myself and to Dark Times Academy in preparation for our first class meeting later this week. So to sort of start, I guess at the beginning, I'm Mandy. I spent most of my career as an academic librarian. I wrote the first book on climate change for librarians and what librarians can be doing within sort of the world of information, within the world of libraries, in order to prevent climate change. It was published by the American Library Association in, 2014. And since then, much of my career has moved more towards looking at technology policy and the information environment and the destruction of the information environment through giant global technology companies, largely based in Silicon Valley. For a long time, I ran an organization called Toa Toha here in New Zealand that focused on artificial intelligence before LLMs, as well as a little bit after LLMs, mis and disinformation, and the impact that technology was having on climate and that climate was having on technology. One of the sort of threads that ran through all of that was looking at the way in which climate is talked about, the way in which climate is sort of handled in everyday conversation and also policy conversations. And one of the things that I've grown increasingly concerned about and worried about over time is that from what I can tell, a lot of our climate conversation, a lot of our climate discourse relies very heavily on an assumption of not just sort of good government, but stable government. It relied on the rules-based international order that appeared following World War II, that was sort of created to stabilize the world following that enormous shock, and is now in the process of being completely dismantled. So many of the things, for example, the Paris Agreement, that were the cornerstones of our response to climate, I think it's very fair to question and to ask ourselves whether those approaches are even capable of working now. So leaving aside the question of whether they were working, I think it's very reasonable to say whatever good they might have done historically, it's clear that they are not able to do that now. So I thought that it might be really interesting to have a class where we bring in people who have been closely working on climate issues, who have been working in various ways to get the policies in place that we need in order to reduce our carbon emissions into the atmosphere and bring about a cooler world and talk about what do we do now? If what you wanted before and what we were fighting for before was, for example, the spread of renewable energy, and we're now in a time and a place where large renewable energy projects can be canceled on a whim. Both I see that happen in the United States, but it's also happening in other places around the world. Is it worth all of that investment in energy into sort of pushing forward these big projects if there's no guarantee that they're actually going to come to fruition? So that's what we're going to be talking about in this class. How do we adapt to the current environment and figure out what the climate movement needs to be working on and then begin that work? If you are at all familiar with climate activism and sort of thinking about climate, one of the things to think about sort of as part of this class, and one of the things that really motivated me is I've worked for a long time on disinformation and climate disinformation issues. And from what I can see at the moment, there's a tremendous amount of disinformation that is coming from multiple sides right now. So you have the sort of technology optimist side where there's this idea that we're going to have a technological breakthrough and that is going to be the thing that prevents climate. And you also have the far right fascist climate disinformation that leads people down eco-fascism radicalization pathways that is clearly being spread within a more sort of centrist community, folks who were not already involved in far right, either belief systems or ideologies, pulling people in. So that's what we're going to be talking about. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I also think it's going to be a lot of thinking really deeply and critiquing and questioning what we've been doing and whether we need to be doing something different, and if so, what that different thing is. So to sort of back up a little bit, Dark Times Academy was founded after Totoha was defunded by the New Zealand government, and it was largely funded because I enjoy teaching classes. I enjoy getting people together to think about and build new ways of thinking and new projects and sort of new approaches to things. And this is a really good way of doing that, I found. The model was one that I honed when I did work at Totoha. And now we're lucky enough to have my colleague Byron Clark, who is working on a master's degree in climate disinformation, as my partner in this to make sure that all of our technology works and I don't have to be responsible for our website or a Moodle site. Because to be honest, I don't think I could do that anymore these days. So that's sort of who I am and what this class is all about. To think about some of the practicalities. So the way that we're going to structure this is each week you'll get some kind of a pre-recording. I think in lots of cases it's going to be a pre-recorded interview with our guest who will be joining us in class, but there are some cases where it might not be, and it might be an introduction by me to the person's work. I think that's what we're going to do with Bill McKibben in particular because he's on book tour. And I didn't want to be like, oh no, let's not have Bill McKibben here because I think Bill McKibben's going to have some fabulously brilliant things to say to us, and some things to talk about. And I certainly have some questions with him or for him. So I have sent you guys all calendar invites, and hopefully by the time you're watching this, you will have received them. We're going to be using Zoom for these classes. If you have any discomfort with technology or you're uncertain about how to use it, please let us know and we can do a one-on-one tech support session to get you comfortable. We'll also have a Signal group for us to talk to each other between classes and share information. And the lectures and readings will be shared with you on a Moodle site. I like to do projects, especially with classes like this, where sometimes I think if we don't have something material that we're working on, it can feel a little bit grim and a little bit stressful. And I don't want that to be people's experience of these classes. So at our first meeting, when we get together later this week, we'll talk about what might work. One of the coolest projects that I've been involved with as an instructor was the creation of the New Zealand version of the Euphorigen investigation. The Euphorigen investigation was put together by the folks at the University of Washington Center for an Informed Public, and we were able to take that and adapt it from an online escape room for American audiences into a printed escape room that was distributed to New Zealand schools and used widely there. So there is a lot of scope for creativity. There's a lot of scope for both sort of thinking big, but also not thinking in ways that make life stressful or hard for us. So we can talk about that more when we get together. And please reach out and email me if you have any questions. And I'm really, really looking forward to meeting everyone. For our first class, we're just going to come together and talk about our own experiences in the climate movement, our sort of thoughts around how the change in government from sort of centrist liberal, in some cases here in New Zealand, I think it would be fair to say that we had a center-left government, into these sorts of far-right fascist regimes is impacting us, how it's impacted our own thoughts about climate, and maybe our initial thoughts on what we need to be doing in order to get to where we want to go. Trying to think if there's anything else. I think that's probably everything. Really looking forward to meeting everyone. And thanks so much. Bye-bye. See you later on this week.